All right, so I mean, how many of you actually work on a volunteer team that is scattered around the country, you know, with roles around the continent, with roles and responsibilities? Okay, and from what I understand, you guys are already doing this. You already have volunteer teams that are functioning at a very high level, doing very important work. So these were some of the teams that we had on the Bernie campaign that made that whole crazy operation possible. We had an event scheduling and maintenance team. It's a name that they came up with, you know, and it just started off with a few volunteers and it grew, and they would call every single phone bank party host. And again, when I saw somebody out there, they said, you know, I don't think that this stuff applies because we don't do phone banking in Europe. And I said, no, but it's not. I just want to drive home the point that I'm not trying to get you guys to phone bank. You know, I was just trying to talk about a process for doing whatever it is you're going to do, and a process of discovery and innovation and invention that allowed us to figure out that big phone banking system. Whatever it is that you wind up doing, whatever different kinds of organizing you wind up doing for DiEM all around the continent, I think that if you can build stronger volunteer teams, that's going to be very helpful. So, you know, we had one team that was calling every phone bank host to prepare them, but then we had another team that called them to follow up and see how it went, but also get them to commit to doing more events. We had the data entry team, which I told you about, and then we had different teams like the data pilots and clickers who actually ran our phone banking system. And I won't bore you the details of it, but it was really kind of funny. We had a help desk team. We had event monitors. People were just creating events on our website, and sometimes they were inappropriate, and usually in very uninteresting ways they were inappropriate. But and so we had monitors constantly checking the new events and canceling the ones or calling the organizer and trying to work it out. But we had another dozen teams that did all kinds of different roles. So things that made the teams work, and I know that you got a lot of this stuff is obvious and you're doing it already, but you know, we wrote guides, you know, we wrote manuals in general for how to participate in any team, but also for how to participate in a particular team. Volunteers used easily accessible tools. We didn't use any fancy weird tools. We used Google Docs to, you know, organize who was doing what. You know, here's an example of just a plain old Google Doc that the data entry volunteer team was writing for itself. You know, the leaders of the team were managing it themselves. You know, we had this big elaborate structure. People would make diagrams to show how things would go. And of course, we used Zoom to coordinate. And so I'm just going to run through a handful of principles that we found, you know, helped us build really important, really powerful teams. So identify a leader. So the first team that we formed this way, remember I told you that there was just 2 of us at headquarters, and for the first 2 weeks it was just me actually, and I was terrified. And we had all these emails coming in to the campaign, and when people did not get responses to their emails, what would happen? I think this happens to you guys too. They would call, sometimes these people would know Bernie, or they would know Bernie's chief of staff, and so they would call them. And so Bernie and his chief of staff and the other people around Bernie, you know, his friends, his neighbors, anybody, they would be like, you know, they had the impression that we were running a terrible operation, which, okay, was true in the beginning. But we didn't want Bernie to know that, and so we needed to absorb all of that crazy energy coming in to our campaign. Also, people were calling, oh, somebody should have yelled at me for starting to tell a story. So we had to put together a help desk. So I sent an email out, and this turned into a process, a regular process that we would do for every team. I sent an email out to 100 people on our list. Out of millions of people, I sent an email to a random 100 people. And I said, would any of you like to be part of our help desk, which is going to be really important and really help us with all this stuff. And so, if so, call into this conference line, and we'll talk about it. So, and I said call in an hour, not like scheduled for next week. Like, in 50 minutes, call. And here's the number. And so 10 people got on the phone. And so I talked with the people I had them all introduce themselves. And a couple people sounded like, oh man, they're going to be bad news, They're going to just take up everybody's energy, and it was all about them. So I just sort of made a mental note. And a couple people just sounded like really nice leaders, like potential leaders, right? And so I picked on one of those people who sounded nice, and I said, would you like to be the coordinator for this group, for this team? And the guy said, because in his introduction, he said that he had done some consulting with nonprofits. And he said, thanks, I would. And actually, I have experience running help desk software for nonprofits. It was like too good to be true, right? But that kind of thing will happen all the time. I sent an email to 100 people saying who can help with a help desk. Somebody with experience doing help desk stuff responded to the email. That kind of thing will happen. And so I let people interact. I used my organizer eyes and ears to, see who might be the good leader, and I asked them to be the leader. So I formed a team around that leader, or coordinator, or whatever you want to call him, and I gave him authority with the team. So which means I explained to the team why the team needed a coordinator. I let them know that it wasn't permanent. It's just, I don't have time to manage your team, so one of you needs to do it. And it's just for logistics so that things can get done, administrative. But I laid it on really thick. In other words, I said, look, we need you guys to be productive and actually get stuff done. We want you to have a good experience. So you have a coordinator, and please respect, the coordinator and follow their lead, So we gave the leader and the team a very clear project to own. In this case, it was answer the emails coming into the help desk. And we explained the whole campaign. We explained the whole big picture of the Bernie campaign and how it was volunteer driven. And we told them about how there was all this chaos and how we were having problems with Bernie and the campaign manager getting bombarded by emails. And so they understood how the help desk fit into the bigger picture. We explained it all, and we made Craig, the leader, explain it back to us on the call. I mean, that's what I did. So that I was sure he understood. And very often in doing this, you've explained something for like 10 minutes, and then you ask the person to explain it back, and they are like, oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I got distracted, on Instagram or something. But they make some other excuse. They don't tell you that. But over the phone, it's hard. So let them ask questions and make sure they really understand that they're the sole owners of this job, right? Now, I told them, if you guys can't figure this out and do this help desk thing, guess what? It's not going to happen. And that means that this grassroots effort on the campaign is going to get bombarded and blown up by, because the people at the top are not going to trust it, because they're going to keep hearing about all this chaos, right? They're going to keep being bothered by people that we're not able to respond to. Does this make sense to everybody? Yeah. So I told them that there's only 2 of us. In your case, you would say, look, we've got a whole continent and 500 million people, and there's only a tiny handful of us doing this, so we need you to own this. And so I really laid that on thick with them, and it made a big difference. Okay, but then I had to spend a lot of time mentoring that leader. So I'm giving you this example of the help desk, but we did the same process with all of our teams, distributed teams that we formed. So, and this is an easy step to skip. But I would take time out of my day, almost every day for the first week, to just get on the phone and listen to Craig. But as I was building all of these teams, I was randomly calling different leaders. There's also another way that I would do it. I would use an app like Calendly. There's all these like scheduling apps. And I could send an email out to a whole bunch of people and say, sign up for a slot, and I'll talk to 5 of you at a time. And there's a way to set that up. You'll have to do some Googling to figure it out, and every 6 months there are new, better tools to do this. But that was a really great way, because if I was driving from one state to another, I would just set up a whole bunch of slots, and every half hour, a new group of 5 people would get onto the conference line, and I would just ask them, how's it going? And I would just spend time mentoring them. I'd get to know people. You know, this reinforced a sense of ownership with them. I would always reinforce a sense of ownership. And you know, my job though was to just learn what was blocking them and find them resources. Okay. So here's one of the really, really important ones. When a team starts failing, what are you going to do? You know, if you're honest, you're going to say, I will rush in and start doing their work for them, right? How many people have done that before? You have somebody, they're supposed to do it, they don't do it, you do it, right? Don't do that. If you start doing their work, it's over, right? So if there's something specific to your organization that they can't learn on their own, then maybe you could show them, right? But in most cases, they can just Google, you know? Just tell them, you can solve this problem, go Google, right? And if they don't want to solve their own problems, then you need to switch leaders of the team. And you know, and there's part of this is that there are some people that just have not yet developed like basic work skills yet, you know? And interestingly, you know, some people have been working for 20 years and they still have not developed those skills, you know? Other people, you know, have not worked a professional job at all, but they have work skills, very good work skills. So it's kind of confusing that way, but it's very important for people to actually know how to work. Okay, now if a coordinator on a team just disappears, then recruit a new one, but you might want to disband the team if the team has had a really bad experience. And you know, leaders disappear for all kinds of reasons, and then you just say, okay, is there anybody else on this team you know, who would be good? Okay, develop a good team culture. This is really important, and I don't mean for, you know, yes, each team will develop its own culture, but you've got to develop an explicit code of conduct for team members in general, right? And so we actually did not do this very deliberately from the very beginning, and we paid for it every day. But the better we did it, eventually developing a standard culture for our teams, the better off we were. And I could tell you stories about other campaigns that are using this model right now, like the campaign that's trying to defeat Ted Cruz and in Texas. And they started off from this experience, because it was Bernie people that went down to that campaign. They started off with a very explicit team culture that all the volunteers get trained in, and all the staff, and it works great. But you know, you can tell people the culture that you want to have with volunteers and with teams, but you have to actually show it. It needs to be enforced, you know, and then they'll see it. And we actually, you know, did use explicit volunteer contracts where it's not like a legal contract, but it was just like, you know, it's like when you're using software, you sign these terrible user agreements. We kind of had that for volunteers on a couple of campaigns. But an example of this is, you know, a culture is like, what happens when you're having a problem with somebody? So one of the points that we really tried to spread around and enforce was, if you're having a problem with somebody or with a coordinator, bring it up with the coordinator. Of course, if it's harassment or something like that, then you should bring it up with their coordinator or with whoever you feel comfortable with. But if it's just like you feel like the coordinator is taking too long or doing something little that's not productive, then tell the coordinator, you know? Or if it's a team member, tell the team member. Do you understand what I'm saying? But what do people usually do? In a normal situation, people do not tell the coordinator when they're frustrated with the coordinator. They tell all the other members of the team, right? And then they tell the coordinator's coordinator, you know? And then maybe they put something on Twitter about how frustrated they are with coordinators, you know? And so, whereas the whole problem could be easily solved by talking to, in most cases, by directly talking to the coordinator. But we all, including myself, we feel awkward about doing that. And that's why you have to, when you've formed a team, the very first, and you tell everybody that we want to have a culture where you just bring it up with the person, the very first time somebody doesn't do that, where they do the opposite, don't get mad at them, just remind them and say, oh, that's not how we do it. Why don't you bring it up with the coordinator? And then everybody sees that that's the way it works. Oh yeah, and this is, sorry, this works in America sometimes, but but there's what I just described, like where you should bring it up with the person, you know, it's in the Bible. You know, Paul, you know, who, you know, was the organizer who created Christianity. You know, Jesus had nothing to do with Christianity. It was all Paul, who was this organizer who came along and invented the whole religion. And I bet you might not have thought about this, but if you've ever read any of the Greek scriptures, you know, sometimes called the New Testament in the Bible, it's they're emails. They're emails from this organizer to the organizations that he set up all around the Roman Empire. So they're organizing emails about like how to structure your organization. That's what half the New Testament is. And so he's got his rules about like how to do stuff. And so one of the rules is to do exactly what I just said, bring it up with the person first. And so anyways, that's, you know, in America we've got issues around religion, so it's always interesting to bring this up. Okay, so that's it. So hopefully that was helpful. Do we have time for 2 questions? Very quick questions. I'll be quick. Yes?
How do you get to the volunteers? How they find you? How do you...
We find them. So you guys have an email list with all these phone numbers that Judith was telling us about. So you send an email, or if you have a texting system, you can text them. But email, just grab 100 emails and send them an email and tell them to get on a conference call. And there are free conference call lines. Tell them, don't email your whole list about joining the phone bank, okay? So I don't want to give the wrong idea. Just grab 100 random emails, or 1,000 if you need to, and then say, join me on this call and I will explain the job. All right, one more question. Yes?
How do you keep people motivated? So how do you give them positive feedback?
Yes. That's a good point. I mean, I should add a little more to the mentorship slide on that. So one thing we would do is we would hold Zoom calls where we'd get the whole team on. And when I say we, like, we had a few organizers that were leading teams really, really well, and these were volunteer leaders, right? And they were really motivating their teams. And so when we did get a little bit more resources, we hired a few of them, made them permanent staff. And their job was to check in with all of these teams, which was like 20 teams, and keep them motivated. And so they would check in with the leaders, but they would also get the teams on Zoom. And sometimes they would say, you know, Zack, you know, and I was sending emails out to the entire, you know, email list. And so I was like slightly famous in Bernie world. And so me or Claire or Becky or the other people that kind of became well known to the volunteers, they would say, could you get on the call? You know, so this would be like, you know, getting one of you on the call, right? And on a Zoom call. And all I would do is I would get on for the first 5 minutes of that call, and I would say, the only way this campaign is able to function is because you guys are running this team so well and being so dedicated, and the other 20 teams. And it's so amazing that you guys are doing this. This has never happened on any campaign before. It's incredible. And then they'd all get tingly feeling, you know, they'd feel really good, and that would keep them motivated. But also, you know, and the leader of the team is not always going to be great at motivating the team. So it is good to have somebody that's checking in from the outside and helping. Yeah. All right, those were the 2 promised questions, but I'm happy to talk about this, all this stuff later on today. And yeah, all right. So now we're going to do the next thing. Here.
Group work.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Oh, and we wrote a book, so it's all in the book. So just get the book, yeah.